The mentality seems to be the same, and the cultish devotion to the cause seems to be the same to me as well. But, I mean, for once, I would actually love to have got this wrong. I kind of want you to play the role of Michael Winner this morning, to dial 0345 6060 973 and say, calm down, dear. Because I can't quite believe what I saw over the weekend. I never get fully engaged at the weekend with the news or with the newspapers. I always manage to just rise ever so slightly above the fray. But I've gone all in today. I can't believe that I'm seeing Tory MPs coming in for the sort of attack that the right-wing media in this country used to reserve for Remainers or High Court judges or, I don't know, unemployed single mothers. Liz is in Cricklade. Liz, what do you think?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Well, I know you feel as if you're being inflammatory, James, or you sort of give that impression, but I think it's a lot worse because Bill Cash has drafted a motion to try and get rid of the parliamentary inquiry, the parliamentary committee, the privileged committee inquiry. Well, because they want it to go away and they want to save Boris.
Save him from what?
Save him from a recall petition.
That's what they're terrified of, is that he's gonna get slung out of the House of Commons by his own voters in Uxbridge.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I suppose...
But that whole recall petition was brought in by Zach Goldsmith, who's second only to Nadine Dorries in his cultish devotion. Go on.
You need to read his tweets, James.
I can't read his tweet.
He's blaming us on Nick Clegg and saying he was against it. Yes, yeah. So basically, a finding...
Nick Clegg? You can't be blaming it on Nick. Hang on. Someone's actually sent me that. Here, I criticised this monstrous system when it was set up by Clegg, saying it would be used to expel inconvenient members. Yeah, you're right. So here we go. The Partygate probe is clearly rigged. It is a jury comprised of highly partisan, vengeful and vindictive MPs. Partisan? They're in his own party.
Yeah.
And nearly all of whom are on the record viciously attacking the person they are judging. So that would be Alberto Costa saying that the next Prime Minister must have standards and integrity. That's a vicious attack on Boris Johnson, according to Zach Goldsmith in the Daily Mail. And Bernard Jenkins saying we're not going to give him an easy ride. That's a vicious attack on Boris Johnson, according to Zach Goldsmith in the Daily Mail.
Yeah, so Bill Cash is hoping that the new Prime Minister will whip the party into getting rid of this inquiry, so it saves Johnson, and maybe the new Prime Minister will put him in, if he does end up losing his seat, they could actually do another Zach Goldsmith.
You know that I'm an old friend of the Cash family, don't you, Liz? Did you know that? I didn't realise you were going to bring old Bill into proceedings, but you're right. He's put forward a motion calling for the scrapping of a privileges committee into whether the Prime Minister knowingly misled Parliament over the scandal. I mean, I guess what we want fans, supporters, Conservatives to do is tell us why they want this inquiry to be called off. And the answer is because they know he's guilty, isn't it? I mean, there is no other explanation. All right, they know he's going to be found guilty, I suppose. They could say he'll be found guilty.
But they'll say they're biased.
Yeah.
They'll say they're biased, yes.
Does it stand comparison with America? Does it have a flavour of stop the steal?
Totally it does. It's completely the same. I just don't know if the numbers are the same. I don't know how many people are lost to this argument because the cost of living crisis is bringing people back to reality. And that might be the thing that saves us, I hope. But it's a pretty serious situation to be in.
OK, let's do it that way round then. And that way, I suppose, more people can get involved. Why are these people so desperate for this committee inquiry to be scrapped? 0345 6060 973. Why? Because it seems to me to be psychologically identical to the desperation to pretend that Donald Trump won the last election in America. 11:28 is the time. And here it is. Mr. Johnson is due to be summoned by a panel to give evidence relating to his knowledge of staff gatherings that took place in Downing Street during lockdown. I think it's pretty clear what is going to happen because he told the Commons that no rules had been broken. And then it turned out he had actually broken the rules. So the defence that when I broke the rules, I didn't know that I was breaking the rules is the only defence he's got. And even his closest supporters don't think he's got the front to pull that off in public. To literally sit there and say, when I said that there hadn't been any parties, the fact that I had actually attended parties was an inadvertent breach of the code, the standards code in the House of Commons. It's that Boris Johnson has ended up so completely and utterly banged to rights. So completely and utterly banged to rights that even his closest supporters can't defend him, so they're calling for the investigation into him to be abandoned. And they're doing so by calling it a witch hunt. Wow. I'm still a little uncomfortable, though, of comparing it to Donald Trump and Stop the Steal or the big lie in America. Liz isn't. I hope you will give me a call now and tell me why that is actually a little bit over the top, James. Being a little bit, you're getting a bit carried away, you're being a little bit overexcited. It's nowhere near as bad as what's happening in America because ... 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Holly Harris is here with the headlines. 32 minutes after 11. This doesn't happen very often, but quite a few of you are pointing out that that Brexit should have been brought into this conversation a little earlier because Sir Bernard Jenkin is a massive Brexiter. He was Brexity before Brexit was even a word, and yet in the cult of Johnson now, that's not enough anymore. The fact that you are going to be sitting on a panel of MPs investigating Boris Johnson's misleading the House of Commons is enough to come under attack from both colleagues like Zach Goldsmith and Nadine Dorries and from the right-wing media in the form of the Daily Mail. It's actually bonkers. The one phone-in I can never do is, why don't you care more? I can never do that. It just doesn't work as a phone. Why don't you care more? Because my job is to make you care. But I don't know that enough people care about this. I don't think, and that's why I'm kind of hoping you'll persuade me that it's not as big a deal as I think it is. Because it looks to me like a sort of pound shop version of Donald Trump's big lie, Stop the Steal. What we've got here is witch hunt and stop the inquiry. Why? Because our man's going to be found guilty. Why? Because he is guilty. Why don't you want the inquiry to go ahead? Because he's going to be found guilty. 11:34 is the time. It's kind of scary. Dave's in Newmarket. Dave, what would you like to say?
Well, basically, he's going to be found guilty. That one's fairly obvious, but
because he is. Because he did mislead the House of Commons, and to say that he did it inadvertently, when the reason why we know he misled the House of Commons about there being parties is because he went to the parties himself. And you can't. I mean, it's like standing there covered in strawberry juice in the middle of a field in Worcestershire in 1978, claiming that you haven't actually picked any strawberries.
True. But the reason, as far as I can see, as far as my friends and family can see, is the reason they don't want the inquiry to go ahead is that one or two more skeletons will come out of the cupboard, and those people who are trying to stop this are the skeletons involved. But that wasn't the reason why I phoned initially. But what I will say is that if I'm on an aeroplane, I feel fairly safe because I know that if the captain has a heart attack, there's a co-pilot there. Yeah. If I'm on a ship and the captain has a heart attack or falls overboard, there's the first officer there. But in the most important job in the country, there's nobody there to take over.
No,
Why?
It's not. I don't know. Well, there is. I mean, Dominic Raab is Deputy Prime Minister still. Nadeem Zahawi is Chancellor of the Exchequer. There are constitutional checks in place to... But he's torn them all up. I don't know about your skeletons in the closet theory either, Dave. I mean, I suppose in the absence of a better explanation, I have to take yours. They're all a little bit in love with Boris Johnson. It's obviously a less satisfactory explanation than yours. But I can't quite get my head around what might come out that they're worried about. Albeit last time he sat down in front of a committee, he accidentally admitted that he'd met that sanctioned former KGB spy without any security present. So they could be worried, like, just generally about what might come out without actually being worried about specific skeletons. The fear will be if Boris Johnson sits down in front of this committee and starts trying to defend himself, God knows how much damage he'll do to himself and then by association to us. But why wouldn't Zach Goldsmith want this inquiry to go ahead? Zach Goldsmith rejected by the voters of Richmond Park and then made Baron of or Lord of Richmond Park by Boris Johnson, who also borrows his holiday home on occasion. Why wouldn't he want this to go ahead? Surely if you've got nothing to hide, that's what this lot always say, isn't it? If you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear. Anthony's in Bletchley Park. Anthony, what's going on?
Hi, James. Well, just going back to that point about the disclosure of information and your previous call, I actually think that they are terrified about. Because if you look at what they've been asked to provide, which is WhatsApp messages, text messages, written communications, I just looked it up on the Privilege Committee website. If there is an incontrovertible link between Johnson and his cronies to the Daily Mail editor or any of their political advisors or political writers, then there's going to be proof positive that the Daily Mail is playing an entirely egregious political role when actually it's meant to be, I laugh and use the word, a newspaper. And that simply isn't the case. If you go back to your analogy of linking it to the January 6th cover-up in the States, it's identical because the DHS have magically had all their text deleted. Oh, look, the Secret Service have had their text deleted.
I don't know that I don't know that there's complicity in the way that you allege here. I don't know what might turn up. Because they're always in contact with their favourite journalist. There's nothing new or controversial in that. The Labour Party are as well. So there's no...
I'm not saying they're complicit. What I'm saying is there may be information that's contained in the various WhatsApp messages or text messages or the written communications that indicate a level of influence which is improper.
Oh, I see what you mean.
In the political world.
So what are they frightened of? It's not actually the verdict. It's all the other stuff that's going to come out. This is actually missing from some of the reporting. Thank God you're paying attention. So this would be like the Wagatha Christie thing, except that they're not going to be able to claim that their phone fell off a boat in the middle of the North Sea, are they?
No, it's precisely so. In my world, it's all branches, sequels, and linkages. And where you get one piece of information going out...
all you need is one message saying, God, if this got out, we'd be in all sorts of trouble, that proves he knew there were parties when he stood up in the House of Commons and said there weren't any parties.
Or even worse, if somebody like the saint in the Dean Doris turned around and said, "Is there any chance we can get the Mail to rubbish, get this story to rubbish this, or to pour cold water on that?" And also, I noticed something that Nick Clegg's wife wrote on her Instagram account this weekend, where she was utterly seething that the Daily Mail had actually they'd censored an article that she'd been asked to write.
Gosh.
And she was. I've actually tweeted it onto your account.
I'll have a look.
If you look at it, it's because the Evening Standard were involved, and she asked rhetorically, "What's the link between the Evening Standard?" Well, Evening Standard, Lebyadev, Daily Mail, Johnson. There you go. Nice little line. It's a straight shot.
There's all sorts going on. So the parallel I sense with America is not one that you find. It's not so much a parallel with the cover-up of January the 6th. It's more the stop the steal, the lie upon which January the 6th was built, that Donald Trump hadn't actually lost the election. What we have here is Boris Johnson hasn't actually misled Parliament when they know that he has. He absolutely has. And pretending that he hasn't is the only way they can avoid more stuff coming to light that would be embarrassing for all of them, perhaps.
And can you just imagine what the powerful impact would be if there is a single message in there or a single WhatsApp that turns around and says something to the effect that the best way of dealing with this is either to get the Privileges Committee disbanded or to rubbish it or to attack the people.
Can we go after this? Because someone's sounded the alarm, haven't they? There's no way that Dorries and Goldsmith and the Daily Mail have all just coincidentally happened upon this line of attack at the same time.
But they haven't got the brain power. They're malicious.
They might have the brain power, but don't believe in coincidences,
No, I don't. No,
so we've got to go after this committee, and we've got to go after this committee because, well, you now have to fill in a gap if you don't like Anthony's theory. Why don't they want this inquiry to go ahead? What are they so scared of? 0345 60 60973. I hope you're right. This is from Art London saying that we're not at our Z point yet, to use your A to Z analogy. We're not at our big line moment. This is more like our first impeachment moment. Although we are definitely going in the same direction. Would you really put it past the Tories to say the election was stolen when the time comes? Yes, I would, but I'm naive, and as we've established many times in the past, I really do believe that we're better than that, despite all the evidence to the contrary. I don't know if you saw Farage this weekend at this sort of nasty conference in America that Viktor Orban goes to and gets treated like an absolute hero. This is Viktor Orban talking about how Eastern Europe is now the real West because you don't have marriage between black and white people, and that the West has been ruined by the fact that that people of different ethnicities have sex and children. Farage appearing at that conference and really revealing himself to be all the things that people like me told you he was over the years, but everyone's, oh no, calm down, he's not that bad. Have a little look at that if you want to be put off your 11s. Jack's in Welshpool. Jack, why do they want to get rid of this inquiry? You thought if there's nothing to hide, there's nothing to fear.
The reason they want to get rid of this inquiry is because if they can find that the most scandalous person to ever be Prime Minister, meaning Boris Johnson, the man that's been surrounded by scandal for the last 15 to 20 years, is found guilty, then that shows a vulnerability in the entire Tory party. If he can be found guilty, then anybody can be found guilty. So if they can get this to go away and he can still be an MP or even be promoted up to the House of Lords, then they could go, "Oh, there we go, we got away with it. That's fine. We can now go about our business with nobody really look under the microscope."
So it's almost like an exercise in impunity. We tried it with Owen Paterson, didn't they? Really, they tried to sort of rip up the whole rule book in order to get Owen. But that's what it is. I mean, if you find the parallels with Trump a little bit too heady, then the parallels with Owen Paterson are almost complete, aren't they? We're going to lose. We've broken the rules. Therefore, we need to get rid of the process by which we're found to have broken the rules.
That's the thing, is that I think, to be honest, in my opinion, it's worse than the Donald Trump scandal. Because the facts are, with Donald Trump, it was only one person and a handful of Republicans supporting him. This is the entire Daily Mail, Nadine Dorris, and also quite a few Tories, I would say, also
Bill
supporting
Cash,
this.
Zach
Bill
Goldsmith.
Cash,
Did expect better of Bill, I've got to be honest with you.
Oh, and you've also got the Zach bloke up in the House of Lords.
That's Lord to you. That's Lord bloke to you.
Yeah, whatever. I mean, at the end of the day, there's a lot more support to try and get this to go away.
So our lot should be able to do whatever they want. We overcomplicate and overthink these things. But if you're in a cult, the cult leader gets your children, doesn't he? He gets to do whatever he bloody well wants. It doesn't mean everybody in the cult gets to do what they want. But if you're in a cult, and you either understand what it's like to be a cult or you don't. If you're in, and I never will, if you're in a cult, the cult leader can do whatever he jolly well wants, and he can do no wrong. And anyone who says he can do wrong is an enemy, and it's all a big scam, or it's all a big hoax, or it's all a big lie. There you go, another parallel with the Corbyn. Look, it was a scam. It's the same as saying it was a hoax. It was a steal. It was a witch hunt. They're all the same as each other. The sooner we can get rid of the cults, the better for all concerned. Thank you, Jack. Vic's embarking. Vic, what is actually going on here? I mean, it's bizarre, isn't it, that these things creep up on us, and suddenly you wake up on a Monday morning and you think, I think the Daily Mail has actually gone further than Fox News now.
Well, James, good morning to you as well. I do believe that your first two callers on this subject had almost hit it on the nail on the head.
Go on.
This parliamentary committee is apparently one of, if not the most powerful committee in Parliament. They can go through everything. They can call whoever they want. I believe it's the one that Chris Bryant resigned from because he didn't want to come across as being influential.
Yeah, and Laura Farris has resigned from it as well, the Conservative MP who's attacked by the Daily Mail today.
And I hear, I mean, it was the first I heard when you said today that Bernard Jenkins has been attacked for this.
Yeah.
And he's one of the most Brexiteer of Brexiteers,
he
as
is.
you say.
And you know what? His
However,
offence is saying that the Prime Minister shouldn't expect an easy ride. How dare you say that the Prime Minister shouldn't expect an easy ride? Boris Johnson is the king of easy rides.
Sir Bernard would not have given him an easy ride. Or whatever your views and wherever you stand in the political spectrum, Sir Bernard is still a straight shooter.
So the madness of it,
the
madness of it is when they turn on their own, isn't it?
Exactly.
So you can understand why they've turned on lefties, or they've turned on Remainers, or they've turned on civil servants, or they've turned on lawyers, or they've turned on judges, or they've turned on teachers, or they've turned on junior doctors, or they've turned on firefighters, or they've turned on unemployed people, or they've turned on foreign people, or they've turned on Brussels, or they've turned on France. But they've turned on their own. They've turned on one of the kings of Brexit.
But however, they've turned them subverted, but the
I think the security service has just intervened. It's 11:45. It's very helpful sometimes to remove names completely. This is the antidote to what I call footballification. You remove names, team names, player names, individual names. So you watch, for example, to use the footballification analogy, you watch something in black and white. You don't know which team is which, and you decide whether or not it was offside, or you decide whether or not it was a foul, or you decide whether or not it was a goal. You do it without knowing. It's like a veil of ignorance, as John Rawls might have termed it. In fact, he did. And that's what you need here. So should a Prime Minister accused of lying to the House of Commons ever be excused from an investigation? And the answer is obviously no. You don't add bits to it to make it yes. You say, should a Prime Minister who has already been ejected by his own party, or who has already been found to have broken the law, has already apologised for misleading the House of Commons? The whole point about standards and privileges, the whole point about rules, is that they apply equally to everybody. So should any politician accused of lying to the House of Commons be excused investigation by the Privileges Committee? And the answer is obviously no. If it was Tony Blair, if it was Diane Abbott, if it was Ian Blackford, whoever it is, should any Dennis Skinner, should any politician accused of lying to the House of Commons be excused an investigation by the committee in charge of deciding whether politicians have lied to the House of Commons? And then you come to the really uncomfortable facts for these cultists. You come to the fact that Harriet Harman, who chairs the committee, was put in that position as a consequence of a House of Commons vote. The House of Commons as a whole approved a motion to appoint Harriet Harman to the committee. The other members of the committee, which until Laura Farris resigned, had a government majority, then elected Harriet Harman as chairman unanimously. This is democracy in action, but they hate democracy. They like him. They like Boris Johnson, and they hate the idea of him being held accountable by democracy, just as they hate High Court judges, just as they hate universities, just as they hate teachers, just as they hate doctors. They hate everybody except the leader of the cult. Give me a better answer. Give me a better explanation of why they don't want this man to be investigated for misleading the House of Commons. Why would any so-called journalist want any so-called politician ever to be excused from accountability and investigation? It's what holds our democracy together. Susan's in Twickenham. Susan, what's going on?
Oh, hello.
Hello.
You've been keeping us alive, I have to say,
Gosh,
in the past month.
That's quite a
Without
responsibility.
You. No, keeping us
Thank you.
sane. Thank you.
Thank
From
you.
me and my husband.
Oh, you're welcome.
Why would they want to stop it? I think what they're trying to do is protect Johnson, to keep him at least as an MP for a while, so that his premiership can be resurrected at some point. And I think that's what they're going for. I think if he's found guilty by the privilege, this is, and I stand corrected, because, you know, if he's found guilty by the Privileges Committee, they can censure him. And then presumably the people of Uxbridge and Ruislip can then say, we want a recall.
Yes.
And he may well lose his seat, and he would lose the possibility of becoming an MP again. Now, whether he can be re-elected to another constituency, I don't know, and I'm sure somebody else does.
He can be. Yeah, but I mean, he could, if he lost, I mean, it would be much harder, wouldn't it? It'd be a much steeper mountain to climb, not least because you'd have a Conservative constituency party having someone foisted upon them who'd actually been recalled by his previous constituency.
That's right. And that constituency has to be told, you know, this man was up before these standards and privileges and was found guilty of X, Y, and Z. We all know he's guilty, perfectly.
But he's admitted he's essentially. I mean, the only wiggle is whether it was advertent or inadvertent. So when I attended a party, I didn't realise it was a party. And you may snigger at that, but then you'll remember he actually did. That was the defence he offered. When I attended a party, I didn't realise it was a party.
Yeah. Absolutely. But he's standing there like some criminal avoiding DNA, standing at parties. You can see him standing there. He's got his red box in his hand. It's almost as if he set up his alibi. But I'm sorry, but that's
no, you don't have to apologise. I don't think they thought the pictures were going to come out, so he probably wasn't thinking that far ahead. But in terms of why are they so desperate to rip up the rule book again, just as they tried with Owen Paterson after that failed so miserably? And it's going to be all the same people doing it. Answer, because looking ridiculous and corrupt is preferable to Big Dog actually being put down forever. Which is what
also being voted out of power, because I trust or Sunak. I mean, their finance ideas, in our opinion, I include my husband in that, are both incorrect. They're both wrong. Gordon Brown, an absolute bloody hero as far as I'm concerned, and I'm very fond of Rachel Reeves as well with what she's coming out with. I wish she'd speak more often, but maybe she can't at the moment. I really think that once they are voted out of power, then Labour is going to come in and really smash through the wall, and not just figuratively. It's actually going to start doing something about the appalling state of the NHS, about dentistry on the beat this morning.
Yes.
My husband and I sat in the Kingston Eye Hospital yesterday all day,
Yes.
practically. The people there are fabulous, but the majority of people there was one doctor, there was one technician nurse. Everyone else was agency staff, which they had pulled in to try and cover the backlog of patients that needed to be
I'm
seen.
desperately trying to
and
tempt...
that's the state we're in.
And of course, the big elephant in the room. The big elephant in the room is once again the B word, because you can't start fixing these problems until you admit what's caused them. And a lot of the staffing problems that the NHS are facing is down to that. Thank you, Susan, and thank you for your kind words. I hope whatever took you to the eye hospital is cleared up as quickly as possible, and it's mutual. I get that quite a lot at the moment, that we sort of keeping people sane. It's entirely mutual. This is therapy for me. I'd look at this stuff and think, that's not right, is it? And then thankfully it turns out there's lots of other people looking at the same stuff thinking exactly the same thing. The Emperor really is naked. And of course, the point at which the entire crowd agrees that the Emperor is naked, apart from the cabal at the back of the Emperor, that's when it becomes an echo chamber. Matthew's in Braintree. Matthew, madness, this. Absolute madness. What did you want to say?
It was kind of going on the same vein as what Susan was just going on about, but from a slightly different perspective. This is the Daily Mail we're talking about.
And Zach Goldsmith and Nadine Dorries and Bill Cash and a few others. Ian Duncan Smith is there. So, I mean,
it's more about the Daily Mail in this case slightly. This is from the paper that would have been putting out EU bad for years and years and years, and letting that seep into people's subconscious, slowly working it that way. And they're doing it with the words witch hunt. Yeah,
they are.
So,
I mean, it's like the Keir Starmer beer stuff, isn't it? Which is they just do it often enough, and it begins to actually change the public discourse. Mm-hmm. And here they are doing it with witch hunt.
The people who still love Boris think, hey, this is a witch hunt against him. How dare they? He's done nothing wrong. Sometimes you take only for 15, however many seconds it was. It wasn't that long, But the fact is that I think that Boris will probably resign either just before or maybe, I'd be surprised if he did it during, but just before, so that he was never charged. He would never be clean, and that when he eventually comes back, and he will come back, his supporters will go, they tried to witch hunt him. So how dare they?
I think
the job was largely undone, according to so the job, not fully accomplished, as Mr. Johnson once says, and he wants another bite at this. I think this is still Operation Save Big Dog, but this is just long term because he's trying to grease himself up.
I'm not going to argue with you. Because I mean, I haven't got a better explanation as to why they're doing it, but lots of different answers today. Probably the most effective or the most compelling, the most convincing is the idea that an actual recall, actually being dragged kicking and screaming out of the House of Commons by his own constituents, would make any form of rehabilitation or return to power almost impossible. Much, much, much harder than it would be if he's allowed to sort of... He's probably going to lose his seat anyway, I'd have thought. A fairly strong chance at the next election, but they've already started talking about him being parachuted into a safe seat, possibly Nadine Dorries' old one, if she goes into the House of Lords. And I wonder what happens actually constitutionally if he were to be subject to recall. What happens to things like his resignation honours lists and things like that? I genuinely don't know, but it's shameful, isn't it, what they've done to our country, these Brexiters. And I don't mean all Brexiters, because Sir Bernard Jenkin is now under attack from precisely the people that would once have been described as his comrades. Ken's in Sheen. Last word probably, Ken. What's it going to be?
Yeah. Hi, James. Enjoyed the show. Insightful and unfiltered, which is great. Very refreshing.
That's a nice phrase. I shall use that.
No, just to say that I think this is about the long game. His supporters think he's a winner, and that one day he ought to come back and will be supported in that. And if this investigation proceeds, so much mud will come out that he may be potentially unelectable in the future.
Yeah, it would kill off any chance of return, any chance of rehabilitation. And it might only be a small chance, but this would kill it off forever.
Absolutely, and I think that's what they're frightened about. So this is why they're trying to stymie the investigation and derail it if they possibly can.
In the absence of any other explanations, that is my favourite. They are desperately worried about what's going to come out, and part of that worry is built upon the desire, a belief that he will somehow be returned, that there will be some sort of rehabilitation. It's the relationship between words and reality that I always find most chilling, and the idea that it's a vicious personal attack on Boris Johnson involves a Conservative MP saying that the next Prime Minister has to place standards and integrity at the core of government. I'll read you that again because it's quite a dark day for British democracy. Alberto Costa, Conservative MP for South Leicestershire, made a swipe at Mr Johnson last month, saying it's imperative the next leader of the party and the next PM places standards and integrity at the core of government. Sorry, what? Pardon? It's 3 minutes after 12, and as is mildly traditional now, we step away from politics for the final hour that we get to spend together today, although we'll be returning to it soon. I sometimes wonder, you probably do too. Thank you for all the kind words as well, following up on Susan in Twickenham's comments. You're not the only one, it would seem, Susan, which is very nice for me to know and to see. But that theory, it needs work, doesn't it? That A to Z theory. I'm sure someone's done it in a pithier, a more easily expressed way than I have. The way that the really bad stuff doesn't happen overnight. It happens in increments. It's like the boiling a frog thing. If you'd woken up in, say, July 2016, shortly after that dreadful referendum, and you'd seen Conservative newspapers attacking pro-Brexit Conservative MPs for the crime of refusing to give an easy ride to a corrupt Conservative prime. Let me say that again. An incredibly right-wing newspaper attacking an incredibly right-wing politician for refusing to give an easy ride to an incredibly right-wing corrupt Prime Minister. That's your thought for the day before we get on to the non-politics stuff. Where in Britain today, make a note of the date, seriously. On Monday, the 8th of August, 2022, an incredibly right-wing newspaper attacked an incredibly right-wing politician for refusing to give an easy ride to an incredibly right-wing Prime Minister's corruption. That's what you've done. Well, not you personally, not you, Keith. That's what we've done. I suppose in a way we're all complicit. That's what the UK has done. We've created a country in which an incredibly right-wing newspaper is attacking an incredibly right-wing politician for refusing to give an easy ride to the corruption of an incredibly right-wing Prime Minister. Wow. August the 8th, 2022. That's quite a moment. And what I mean is, if that had happened in July of 2016, we'd have all gone absolutely tonto, wouldn't we? But it's just part of a culmination, it's part of a process. It's lots of little bits as it's happened. So, we pick the big ones, the obvious ones, whether it's the prorogation of Parliament or the lying to the Queen or trying to get Owen Paterson off the hook by ripping up the rule books or standing up in Parliament and saying you hadn't been to parties and then saying, well, I had been to parties, but when I was at the party, I didn't realise it was actually a party, and then fibbing about where the money was coming from to decorate your house and claiming that you dropped your phone in the North Sea. Oh, sorry, that was Rebecca Vardy's agent, wasn't it? Claiming that your WhatsApp had somehow disappeared when you changed phones, doing the VIP lanes for your mates during... it's all... just an incremental process leading to where we are now, an incredibly right-wing newspaper attacking an incredibly right-wing politician, an incredibly right-wing pro-Brexit newspaper attacking an incredibly right-wing pro-Brexit politician for refusing to give an easy ride to the corruption of an incredibly right-wing pro-Brexit Prime Minister. I'm tempted just to keep riffing on this until 1 o'clock, because that's actually staggering. But I'm not going to, because I want to talk about something completely different. My interest in matters woke. You know how funny I find these desperate attempts to convince us that we're under attack or our values are under attack. Someone sent me a statistic at the weekend that was rather helpful because it detailed how many libraries have been shut since 2010. So if you're really upset about so-called trigger warnings on Shakespeare, and you really feel that the woke mob is attacking British culture, you presumably are picketing your local library every day You're making sure they're not going to close your local library. They've closed so many libraries since the Tories got in 2010 that even the national stock of books has plummeted. But you're supposed to get upset about a statue because that's what a statue you're never going to see in a town you've never visited. That's really culture. They can shut your local library. That's fine. That's not attacking our culture values at all. But taking down a statue of a bloke you've never heard of in a town you've never visited, that's really bad. So you know how interested I am in it all. Part of my interest is comical. I find it largely hilarious, except when it's not. The tale of the American student who was head of the junior common room at Oxford University when they chose to take down a picture of the Queen, even though he voted to leave it up. The story of how his life was just torn to shreds by the media attention that he received is actually heartbreaking. We've covered it on the programme. You can find it in the archive. So it's not always funny, but it is generally pretty hilarious to hear people who would struggle to know which end of a pen to use, claiming that they are deeply, deeply troubled by attacks upon our canon and our literary history. But I am also interested in the psychology of it. I am also interested in what it is that is exercised by these sort of stories. And I mean that from a desire to get my head around why it's so easy to make people so angry about stuff they don't understand or know about. What is it? And I think it's to do with an implicit insult. It's so I want you to try to think of times when you've actually been the problem rather than the solution. You've been anti-woke, if you like, or anti-progress, or anti-decency, anti-modern, anti-change. Anti-change, there it is. Because that's where it comes from. Someone tells you there's something fundamentally wrong with a statue that's always been in your town square, then it makes you feel soiled and guilty. So you resist the idea that statue should come down because that would mean that you'd been derelict in your duties. You wouldn't have been there. I tell you, the best example was actually equal marriage. When lots of members of the Church of England, and I know the story's not gone away yet, I know the lots and lots of decent people who just balked slightly at the speed with which same-sex marriage was mooted as happening in churches, in English churches. And I got on my high horse about it, as you'd expect, but I realised that it wasn't homophobia, it wasn't bigotry. For a lot of people, of course, the homophobes and the bigots hated the idea of equal same-sex marriage in church. But it was just a bit of, what the word you want is sort of discombobulation. Because you've spent your whole life going to church. You've never really thought about the prospect of two fellas getting married in a church. And then suddenly it's about to happen. And you've just raised your eyebrows. You haven't even raised your voice. But then, self-appointed sanctimonious people like me come along and start calling you homophobic for raising your eyebrows, and you double down. You're like, well, don't call me homo. I'm not homophobic. I'm just a bit discombobulated by the idea of two fellas getting married in church because it's never happened before, and I never thought about it, and it'd take me a bit of time to get used to it. So I can get my head around the idea of being anti-change, of being on the wrong side of these arguments, and not just because I'm getting old, but because I think deeply about why people who I don't agree with end up thinking what they think. I think as deeply about that as I do about why I end up thinking what I think. And I think I've got an example. Of being wrong. And I need you to make me right again. And this is really going to surprise you. And I would add, for those of you who don't know, that I am very much a Hellenophile. I adore the country of Greece, Greek culture, Greek history, but mostly just Greece, modern Greece, as it is. It's my happy space, my happy place. It's, where I go to in my head when I want to de-stress. And I was there 2 weeks ago, and I just love it. I speak a little bit of the language. I love it. I love everything about it. But I have a bit of an obstacle to the widespread belief that British museums should return artefacts to the countries that they came from. And I think the reason I've got is partly due to being anti-change on this because it makes me feel that all the times I've enjoyed visiting museums, I've somehow been complicit in something dirty and wrong. So you're making me feel soiled. Therefore, I'll resist the idea that there's anything wrong with it. But the other bit is this. I think it would be the end of museums in this country. Or what would we have? If we had to give everything back to the countries where it had come from, what would be left? Some sort of Anglo-Saxon coins and a couple of axe heads or something? Oh, we'd have the crown jewel. No, we wouldn't. They'd have to go back to India, wouldn't they? So, it's a light-hearted hour. I don't want us to have a scrap on this one. I don't really have scraps anymore on the programme. It's because everyone can see that the Emperor's naked and the ones that are still pretending he's not are too frightened to ring me. But the phone lines are always open. I don't really want to have a scrap on this one, and I think I'm probably engaging in a little bit of white privilege there, or cultural privilege, Anglo-Saxon privilege, because this might be something that you do actually want to have a scrap about, because you feel passionately that the bronzes, for example, that have just been announced in East London, South East London, 72 bronzes stolen by British troops in February 1897 are to be returned to Nigeria. And I have already patronised you by suggesting that this could be a light-hearted conversation because this is something you feel deeply and passionately about. And I don't want to patronise you, but I'm not going to be dishonest when my heart or my guts tell me that museums are really good. Really good. And you can't turn the clock back. And as long as the artefacts have been really well looked after and are properly revered and respected, I don't really see why. And it might be me being British privilege on this, because I'm sure that we are net beneficiaries of artefact transport between countries. In fact, probably the biggest beneficiary of all when it comes to foreign artefacts sitting here, because of the nature of the sort of 18th and 19th century. If Stonehenge had ended up in Texas, I don't think I'd feel passionately that it had to be brought back. So why, 0345 6060 973, why am I wrong? Why? So trustees at a museum have agreed to return looted artefacts, including its collection of Benin bronzes, to Nigeria because it is the moral and appropriate thing to do. And I just need your help in being woke on this one, because I genuinely react to this story at first glance by just going, well, as long as they're looked after and they're on display and they're properly... And also, most of the scholars, we've got some great scholars, it just seems to me to be a bit silly. So here's an invitation you won't hear very often on this programme. Please help me be more woke. 0345 6060 973. Why is this important? When we brought the Elgin marbles back to London, they were being used as target practice by Turkish troops. The sort of dog days of the Ottoman Empire. Elgin arguably rescued them from oblivion. And why should we give them back? We're responsible for their survival. And I use we very lightly here, and that perhaps is part of the problem, isn't it? In fact, that's a beautiful little discovery I've made there entirely by accident. It's not we at all. I've got nothing to do with Lord Elgin dancing around the Dardanelles in the 1890s and helping himself to anything that looked fancy. But somehow it feels like we, and that's what being anti-woke means. It's like you feel fellow feeling with a slaver who you've never heard of. Somehow it's become the we of it. It's not. But you feel that it is, therefore you don't think the statue should come down. I think we should keep a lot of these artefacts that we've had for 100 years or more, because we've looked after them really well and we've possibly saved them from all manner of indignities in their countries of origin. But in my heart of hearts, I know I'm wrong. What would we have left is actually quite an interesting question, which we may touch on as well. It's been pointed out to me we'd still have York Railway Museum. This is from Nathan, and quite possibly the Derwent Pencil Museum. Yeah, that's kind of my point. It is 12:19. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Giving back artefacts. Liz is in Warwick to kick things off. Liz, what do you reckon?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I'm kind of split like you are. I do hope that we can keep things in the country, so that we can go down to London or whatever to see them. But I did go on holiday a few years ago to the Nile, to Egypt, on a Nile cruise, and I found it quite heartbreaking that, every sort of now and then the tour guide would say, oh, and here would be whatever artifact, but actually it's in New York or it's in Berlin or it's in London. And that made me think, No, actually, it should really be here. So I don't know. I'm kind of split on how I feel about it.
Yeah, and I think we both probably know somewhere deep inside that they. I don't want to say where does it end, but I'm about to say where does it end. I guess there's an argument for the circumstances in which. So what if you bought it fair and square from someone who was in charge of that country at the time, even if it was only a temporary dictatorship? You bought it fair and square. You bought the contents of that pyramid and you brought them back to London. And now the government's changed and the new government says that the old government never should have let you buy it, therefore you've got to give it back. That wouldn't be fair.
No, it wouldn't. But on the other side, a couple of years ago, before lockdown, there was an exhibition, the Saatchi Museum, brought everything over from the Tutankhamun relics and everything, and they brought it over for a specific exhibition, and it was a sellout. Everyone went to see it, and it was wonderful. And I wonder if maybe we can do that. You know, we can return the things, but then bring them over
and they go on tour
periodically. Yeah, and maybe then we'll be more appreciative of our own history and our own artifacts, because, of course, you know, the Egyptians, the Romans...
Well, what would we have, though? This is what worries me, is that there'd hardly be any museums left. We've got some nice stuff, but, I mean...
Well, maybe it would interest people more, you know, like Anglo-Saxon. We've got loads of things, you know, they might not be... That's what I'm saying. They're not... you know, like exotic, like Tutankhamun and everything. But maybe it will introduce people and make them more interested in our own local history, you know. And
maybe.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. It's not as glamorous or anything, and it is...
There's a carpet. Do you know there's a carpet museum in Kidderminster, not far from you, Liz? Have you ever been to Kidderminster Carpet Museum?
No, I haven't.
It's actually fantastic. It's well worth a visit. And there's a lot to do in Kidderminster. Unfortunately, I've run out of time, so I can't list it all for you. But it is, I mean, there's loads to do, including going to the Kidderminster Carpet Museum. So you've got the Kidderminster Carpet Museum, the Derwent Pencil Museum, the National Railway Museum in York. But in terms of actual art, what you'd call artistic, cultural... Yeah, it's a funny one. Terry's in Belfast. Terry, what would you like to say?
Well, I'm kind of ambivalent about returning artefacts. For instance, the collection at the British Museum of a lot of the Mid-East artefacts that are there that would have potentially been destroyed.
Yeah, now is this a defence? Is this a defence? Because they wouldn't be destroyed now. So I'm with you. Although I think we all know I'm wrong.
In Syria,
yeah,
that's what's been going on. And in Southeast Asia, you remember in Southeast Asia, it was about 15, 20 years ago, and fundamentalists were blowing up and destroying the ancient Buddhists.
You're right. And ISIS ISIS did a lot of stuff, didn't they? They destroyed some stuff that was millennial.
So it's a difficult thing. It's a difficult thing because.
But then we made Nadine Dorries Secretary of State for Culture. So you know, arguably, we're just as vandalous, if that's a word. We're just as hooligan-like in our approach to culture as the people that are blowing up temples were.
I mean, it's an odd thing because in the rural parts of Northern Ireland, there is no kind of heritage funding. And like the parts of North, like particularly where I come from in County Tyrone, is littered with Stone Age, you know, like build burial chambers, you know, tours and things like that. And there's no funding put into it.
So we've missed. So we've got a sort of weird colonial mindset on this. We're more interested in the exotic stuff that we've half-inched from pyramids and Greek temples than we are in the stuff beneath our feet, stuff beneath our soil.
Well, yeah. It's kind of also I think because London, it's because because London is so central and the British Museum is kind of considered this huge big institution and so on, and the Victoria and Albert Museum. I mean, no one ever talks about the enormous collection, you know, at the Victoria and Albert Museum of artifacts from in particular like India and
That's
China.
right. Yeah, that's right. The problem I've got, and this is where I'm being anti-woke, is that I am rendered uncomfortable by the direction of traffic, because I think eventually there'll be hardly any museums left in this country.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, I mean, you know, in every country, museums exist that contain artifacts that may or may not be stolen. It's the word "stolen" is to me, it's a very difficult word to use. It's a very odd word to use, because they not necessarily were stolen. They weren't.
No, it conveys something a little bit different. I mean, plunder is also a synonym for stealing.
Yeah, plunder.
But it's a more sophisticated, it's a subtler word. Plunder was often a means of payment. So Brentford was plundered, you know, Terry, by royalist. I get a bit confused. The Battle of Brentford, which was two British armies fighting each other, and if they thought that your village or your town was loyal to the other side, they would plunder it. They would loot it. Admittedly, not so much for cultural artifacts as for sort of food and beer, but a difference between things that have happened in war and things that have happened in peacetime, a difference between things that were bought in good faith from a government that had the right to sell them but has now been replaced by a government that doesn't think you should have sold them. I'm being tiny bit tongue-in-cheek, but only because I know that I'm wrong, even though I feel that I'm right. But the fear that there'd be no museums left, this is what it's like to be anti-woke, isn't it? So you can't do that to the National Trust because I've always gone there. How dare you change? This is what it's like. I'm saying you can't do that to our museums because there'll be nothing left in them. But I'm on the wrong side of history on this one. It's very helpful for me to know what it feels like to have a problem with the National Trust publishing actual history that you don't like. I don't want my National Trust spoilt with uncomfortable thoughts about slavery. Stop it. I don't want my museums ruined with uncomfortable thoughts about plunder and stealing. Stop it. That's it, isn't it? Wow. We'll almost get a woke watch out of this if we carry on in this direction. And Nancy is in Forest Hill. And Nancy, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. First off, I just want to say I'm a long-time listener, first-time caller.
Thank you. Welcome.
And I personally live in Forest Hill. I'm a regular. I regularly go to the Horniman Museum for a number of different reasons. Including
this is the museum that's agreed to give back 72 objects that were taken from Nigeria.
Exactly. It's actually only 12 of the statues, and the rest of the statues are all in different museums throughout the country, but also in other places around the world. Okay. But my point is that I think that these statues definitely deserve to go back to Benin because, well, for two reasons. Firstly, do the children of Benin State in Nigeria have a right to learn about their own history while they're in Benin, while looking at these statues? I think it's very important for us to say, like, these are so informative about learning about histories around the world, but do people in Benin, do people in Egypt, do people in Greece have a right to learn about their history in schools, in museums, with their own artifacts? I think that's my first point. And the second point is...
Can't really argue with that.
The second point is there's a politics in museums that really portray the politics of colonialism and neocolonialism today. And I think it's really important for us to recognise that a lot of times when we have these artifacts in our hold, in our museums, they're positioned in a way that portrays native and indigenous cultures of the Africas, of Abiyala, as in the Latin America, of Asia. It portrays these communities as not necessarily being civilized. They put them in natural history museums. They put them in museums that don't necessarily talk about their communities as being part of civilization or part of a modern history. And I think that's what we need to drive home, is that actually...
So I'm not just being anti-woke here, I'm actually being quite colonialist.
Yeah, it's another stage of how we perceive the old world, how we perceive the old...
Well, there's an arrogance attached to it that's bordering on racism, because I'm thinking about British children like me being deprived of their ability to visit museums and learn about the world, whereas you're thinking about Nigerian children being deprived of their right to learn about Nigeria, to learn about their own culture in the land where it happened.
Exactly. And I think also you have to remember as well, and you haven't made this point, but I know from historians who've written letters on this problem before, they've talked about how they don't feel that African and countries outside of the world can look after these artifacts. Museums are not necessarily well fitted or well equipped to look after these artifacts. And that also stems from colonialism. It's a paternalistic way of looking at these countries, saying that we will look after your treasured objects for you, or we will print your money for you, or we will refine your resources for you in the hope to look
patronising, arrogant, and a bit racist, then, in other words, isn't it?
Yeah. Sorry to tell you that, James.
Well, I kind of knew that already, but I really like museums. And this is what being anti-woke feels like, is that you know you're wrong, but you don't want to admit it because that would involve changes that you don't really want to see, even though you know that they're right.
Yeah. I think...
Thank you for being gentle with me.
Oh, no worries, no worries. I think it's easy for us to position everything as being woke or anti-woke, but I think that's such a really... I don't want to use the word primitive because it kind of anti the conversation we're having now, but it's a very basic way of having a conversation.
Oh, I know it is, and I don't know how familiar you are with the way we handle it on the show. I mean, it's very... We deploy some comedy on this and lightheartedness, but you also know that the lazy tabloid culture that we inhabit would describe the decision of the Horniman Museum as being woke. I mean, thankfully, it's only in the Times today, so it doesn't appear under that sort of headline. But that's the only reason I'm doing it. It's unhelpful, except insofar as it helps me understand the impulse behind people subscribing to schools of thought that I find ridiculous and a little bit repellent when it comes to things like the National Trust or statues of slavers. Because for now at least, I'm on the wrong side of this argument for the wrong reasons. And it's the same reasons that put people on the wrong side of arguments that I'm on the right side of, if that makes sense. And Nancy, thank you. 12:31 is the time. Tim Humphrey is here with your headlines. It is 12:34 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. This is interesting. As a person from Benin City, this is from Joshua, whose Benin mask was stolen by the Brits in 1897. When we asked for it back in 1997, the British Museum said, "We are not in the business of righting historical wrongs. I am 100% for returning artefacts. We are not in the business of righting historical wrongs." See, if I was reaching, and I am still a bit, for the defence of this status quo, it would be that is it the job of museums to right historical wrongs, or is it the job of politicians and governments? Should individual museums be called upon to surrender items that may have arrived in those museums originally at great expense? And I think a lot of people are just saying yes to this stuff. But that means there'll be very, very little left in British museums eventually. To which you might reply by saying, so what? A lot of people are mentioning 3D printing, which takes us back to the conversation that we had. What did we have the conversation about? NFTs, wasn't it? About fakes and real things, and what are you actually buying when you buy an NFT? I don't want to go there again. It made my head hurt. But I don't know that I want to see a 3D printed Benin bronze or Elgin marble, Parthenon marble. I just betrayed my own thoughts there by calling, because the Elgin marbles are named after the bloke that stole them. Should really be called the Parthenon marbles, shouldn't they? And of course, I'm sure they are in many quarters. Replica bronzes in the museum. Apparently the Sutton Hoo treasures at Sutton Hoo itself are replicas, because the real ones are in the V&A. I don't know if I'd be happy with replicas. What if they didn't tell you they were replicas? You wouldn't know. You just go to but then it'd come out 6 months down the line. You've been looking at... Anyway, Akane is in Camberley. Akane, what would you like to say?
Hi, yes, I'm probably taking on from your previous caller. I was a journalist covering the story when one of the Benin bronze was due to be delivered to the Oba of Benin. Oh, yeah. And initially I had the opinion that, as some Nigerians had, that it's better left where it is, because you have a very negative view of the government's ability to look after the artifacts. But when I covered that story, and we had a live connection, which is very rare, with the Oba's palace and his courtiers, you were moved by how relevant that, what it meant to them to get a piece of their history back. And, the Abbot took great pains to tell us, what it meant for him as the son of, his grandfather who had lost those bronzes. And it's almost like they were, I don't know, I think it's fair to call it stolen, because then it lets you know that a wrong has been done, because, you took something that didn't belong to you without permission and you've kept it. So I like
this is empire, though, isn't it? I mean, this is what it feels like, and I'm slightly cosplaying now, because I think I'm going to have to admit that I'm completely wrong. But I'm imagining what it feels like if you can't countenance the idea that the empire was wrong, the way you just talked about stealing, there's a tiny little bit of me that sort of goes, well, no, it wasn't stealing. It was missionary work, or it was cultural colonization. Because ultimately you end up having to admit the empire was just a massive crime.
Yeah, I mean, what comes to mind is recently, I don't know if it's a fair comparison, some of the women who say they were forced to, give up their children for adoption.
Yes.
Maybe because they were told, they had been wrong in having them, they couldn't look after them. The point is it still belongs to them, and they will still have that longing for that child, and the child will still have the longing for its mother. And, I just felt on that day, I was so moved because I realized...
Gosh. What year was this, Akane? What year was this?
What year?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh! Before we were taken over, I guess sometime in the 1960s, 1950s, 60s. Yeah.
Okay. You sound much younger than that.
Yes. So I don't know. I just think the ramifications of having it back go further than we can imagine for people in terms of their sense of identity, in terms of feeling that they have a right to define themselves, because it's not just that they were taken away. Another culture was superimposed on them.
That's the
point. So they're still longing to get back to their roots, to understand who they are. So,
and because I'm a member of the culture that was superimposed on them, I can hold a very strange opinion on this and sort of think that we have a right to, because we've looked after it, or we'd look after it better, or we would do this, or we would do that. It's exceptionalism. At its worst, isn't it? It's exceptionalism, or it's a colonial mindset to think, oh, you can't trust the Nigerians to look after this stuff. In fact, here's Tim in Norfolk saying that as an antique dealer, and I'm not cross with you, Tim, because I get how you end up here. He says, as an antique dealer, I know that valuable cultural artefacts which are not protected are lost from history into the black market. Once they're gone forever. If the Benin bronzes are returned to Nigeria, they will be vulnerable to looters.
I mean, since that coverage, I'm of the opinion, I used to share a similar sentiment, but since that coverage, I'm of the opinion that it's the right of the Benin people to do, it's their right, it's their prerogative to look after it or not to. It's theirs. So
even if it were to get lost, it's not, when we don't get to appoint ourselves as the world bronze police, do we?
Exactly, especially when you're taking it by theft. No, you can't,
The International Artifacts Police, when we don't exactly have a squeaky clean record. Thank you, Akane. Amazing connection you have with the story. I love it, as you know, on the programme when things like that happen. And then the fear of what we'd be left with in this country is irrelevant to most of the conversation that we're now having. Although Emma's at great pains to draw our attention to some splendid, what you might call indigenous history. There's a wonderful display of. There's an ongoing excavation at somewhere called Must Farm of a Bronze Age settlement. And you can follow things there in real time. We've got such a rich history, she says, of successive cultures making England a beautiful tapestry of amazingness, and it's always overshadowed by the flipping Tudors and now else. She makes a very valid point. And finally, it wouldn't be the end of museums at all. Museums already loan out items or partake in travelling exhibitions. It would more likely foster happier relations between institutions without the sourness of the shadow of theft. The sourness of the shadow of theft. Fumi is in High Wycombe. Fumi, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello.
Thank you very much for this very important topic. I'm actually a Nigerian myself, and I was just saying that what breaks my heart is Nigeria itself is a society where even human life is not secure.
Right.
So if we haven't safeguarded the lives of people, how are we going to safeguard Benin bronzes? And I came to this country about 30 years ago and didn't know we had such a heritage until I visited the British Museum. So as much as I can be emotional about wanting the bronzes to go back to the Abbot palaces, the reality is I think they're safer here. That's the brutal truth. And what we need to do is be honest about that and put in back home to make them safe and accessible to everybody. In other palaces, the Nigerian children, the generations to come, will not have access to those bronzes. They will not see them the way we've been able to here.
Well, what about the argument? Because that, and you being Nigerian puts you in a slightly in a very different position from the one I'm in. Because, I mean, who made us the International Artifact Police? What gives us the right in this country to say, well, we'll keep them then because you Nigerians can't be trusted with them.
Well, it isn't so much being an international artifact police. Unfortunately, history doesn't allow us to really understand, although people have come up with inferences. We don't know the truth really about how these artifacts exchanged hands.
We do about these ones. These ones were straight up nicked by soldiers in February 1897.
So nicked by the soldiers and kept here for safeguarding. Now, soldiers are nicking lives in Nigeria on a daily basis. They're nicking things that are more important than bronzes, and I'm not convinced they're not going to nick these as well and sell them back to wealthy Brits anyway. So the question is, have we got the level of sophistication and infrastructure back home to keep them safe and make them accessible? It's the brutal truth.
No, it is. It's a brutal view. Because the last caller made it clear that he believes it is Benin. It would be the Benin right to even lose them, if you see what I mean. They've got no business. They've got no business not being there, even if it's bad for them that they go there. And I think you both prove why this actually isn't necessarily as easy as it looks at first glance. Fumi, thank you. So that would be the reason not to send them back, because they might get lost. Not to put too fine a point on it. But, of course, that is post-colonial. And it can't be for Fumi, because she's Nigerian herself, but for me to endorse her opinion is for me to come over all post-colonial and saying, well, no, you can't trust them to look after it. We'll have to take charge over. Yeah, thank you very much, Perkins. Pick up the bronzes. We're taking them back to London. Can't trust these people to look after them. They don't even realise how valuable they are. And if they did, they'd probably sell them. I mean, it's horrible when you put it like that, but that is probably the mindset that explains some of the history that we're examining. Lots of other examples of places you can go. We might do that another day. Wait until the holidays are in full swing. It's 12:45. 12:47 is the time, and there it is. The argument that artifacts in this country's museums should stay in this country's museums because, and then you can insert pretty much any argument you want, except perhaps they were bought in good faith, albeit in circumstances that the current government of that country would like to reverse. They've all got to go back. So British museums in our lifetime could become almost a thing of the past, in the same way that the Tories have done to libraries in a lot of towns and places. But remember, the real threat to your culture is more history being displayed at National Trust properties. Good Lord, what a strange place we've become. Abigail's in Balham. Abigail, what would you like to say?
Yeah, I'm probably going to upset the other lady that just spoke, but I was really quite cross at the thought of it. I do not agree with this idea that when you go to people's places and you nick stuff that you get to keep it.
No.
If I had £100 billion and I put that £100 billion, because nowadays it's all trillion and billions, you know, if people's got £1 million, they're thought to be quite poor now.
Yeah.
But if I put £100 billion in my back garden and I poured petrol, which is another expensive item now, all over my £100 billion and I set fire to it, that's my business.
Yes.
I'm allowed to do that because it belongs to me. I am so fed up with this idea that white people or European people have a better idea of what to do with African, i.e. black stuff, than the Africans do.
Yeah.
If the Africans were so bad at looking after their stuff, how did they get it to steal it in the first place? My point of
hang on, just back up that last bit again. If they were so what? How did they what?
If they were so bad, if the African people of Benin were so terrible at looking after their own stuff, their own artifacts, how did the European soldiers...
how come they survived for thousands of years to be stolen in the 19th century by the Europeans in the first place?
Exactly.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of it that way around.
Well, I'm sorry, because I've had this conversation with lots of people.
Have you?
How do they get... Yeah.
Why?
People talk about it. Because I'll go into details. I'm going to finish this point, and I will get into it.
Sorry.
I'm not just sidestepping.
No,
I'm not doing a political number. But yeah, so I don't agree. I'm a gazillion % against what that other female just said.
Yes,
we, as in Fumi. We have to, as in African people, black people, whichever nation, whichever indigenous population that have been raided and had their stuff stolen, have to take ownership of their own stuff.
Well, you know what? I think you're obviously right, actually. I understood the argument that if they're going to get destroyed or sold if they go back to Nigeria, but that's the point. We've managed to do ours, haven't we? This country, we've messed up lots of things. I'm sure I can't think off the top of my head, but there must be lots of things that we haven't looked after very well from our own. We made Nadine Dorries Secretary of State for Culture. That hardly speaks of a country that values its own culture.
I'm trying to step away from that person,
yeah, fair
to be
enough.
fair with you. I'm not a huge fan of hers.
Are you not?
But yeah,
surprised me.
No, I'm not.
No.
She just sounds like I'm not going to say, she doesn't seem to be very sensible. Let's leave it like that.
Yes.
But I just get really annoyed with this idea that, because Europeans have looked after it, therefore they know what to do. No, they don't. They stole it, they nicked it, they need to return it. And that's why I say to you that if we were so bad at looking after our own artefacts,
then how come they were there to be stolen in the first place? That's a pretty powerful point, actually. I shall possibly wheel that one out myself if I ever find myself on that side of the argument. There it is. You can't, even if it were true, it wouldn't matter, and it can't be true anyway, because I think the Parthenon marbles were in a pretty run-down state, and they were, but the temple's still there at the top of the Acropolis. You can see the gaps where they've been essentially torn off, chiselled off the stone. So even if they were being shot at by Turkish soldiers, and I'm not sure that that's true, that might just be one of the myths that's grown up around them in order to justify British retention. They're not there now, and they'd survived for 2,500 years or more. So you can't really accuse the Greeks of being derelict or uncaring. This is a different conversation from the one I was expecting. I love it when this happens. Thank you, Abigail. Awaya is in Hampstead. Awaya, what would you like to say?
Okay. Hi, James.
Hello, Awaya.
First of all, I would like to say that Nigeria that we have that exists today didn't exist in 1897.
No.
So in 1897, when I'm a direct descendant of Oba Ovorame, who they called Overami. That's my great-great-grandfather. Okay? And at the time,
seriously?
Absolutely, and I'll tell you a bit more as we go on. That's my great-great-grandfather. Okay? The present king now, the Oba of Benin now, is a first cousin of mine, and the one before too was my grandfather. But the point being this.
Whoa! How long have we got? Oh, we've got 7 or 8 minutes, so I'm going to be able to explore this in time. I just didn't want to.
Okay, go on.
Wow.
Okay. All right. And another thing we have in common is that you went to one of the Benedictine schools that I sort of boarding schools that I went to. I think you went to Ampleforth.
I did, and you went to Downside.
My son went to Downside. I went to Ramsgate. I went to Abbey School in Ramsgate in Westgate. Yes, the Benedictine monks. Yes.
Well, I never.
Abbey School.
Yes.
Right.
I've got a million questions I want to ask you, but let's just focus on what should happen to these bronzes. What should happen to these bronzes now?
James, first of all, your previous caller that called and said, these bronzes shouldn't be returned back to Nigeria. She doesn't not understand. I'm from Benin. These bronzes are deities. The Benin people worship their ancestors.
Yes.
The king is the human embodiment of the kings. And all these things are not just arts. I understand. They're more.
Yes.
Right, that's one. And two, saying that they're Nigerian art. They're not Nigerian arts. They're Benin arts. Because in 1897, Benin was the last independent kingdom that the British conquered. They had conquered most of the Northern Protectorate, other areas surrounding. They'd taken over Ghana, the Gold Coast. And Benin was the last independent kingdom. So after Benin, the whole of what is now Nigeria fell. So a lot of people in Nigeria, different tribes, different languages, they don't understand the significance of those artifacts to Benin and especially to the palace.
So why are they not going back to Benin then? Why are they going back to Nigeria?
Okay, so if you look at the sort of the international sort of arrangements, conventions, laws, and so on and so forth, because Nigeria is now Benin is now part of Nigeria, it's not an independent kingdom of its own.
I thought it was a republic.
No.
Oh, okay.
You're confusing Benin City. Benin City is in Midwest Nigeria.
Okay.
Republic of Benin is a country that is next door. They are descendants of Benin. Before 1972.
Sorry. Yes, no, I get it. I completely understand. So then, so they're going back to the right place then, as long as they go back.
That's right.
Yes.
As long as they go back to Benin. But the big argument back home in Nigeria now is if it's returned to the federal government, which is Nigeria, ought they not to return it to Benin? And that's the main sort of very, very sticky area, because I know there's some artifacts actually coming from Germany this year at some point, about 1,200 pieces coming from Germany. The cockerel went back. The cockerel at Jesus College in Cambridge, that went back. That was initiated. The campaign to bring that back was initiated by the previous Oba Eridiawa, and it finally got returned to his brother, who passed it on to the palace. So it's controversial because the Benin people want it and they need it for ancestral reasons. Nigeria, the country that is now Nigeria, and that Benin is now part of Nigeria, wants custody of it as well. And then we have all these issues going on over abroad, the moral argument and this and that. So I just thought I'd put my piece in.
I think you win. I mean, crikey. So in a way, you actually have a claim to owning these bronzes, or at least having.
Of course.
So who was your great grandfather? Ovon Ramwen was your great grandfather.
Yes. Overami, if you look at the Telegraph of 1897, if you do some research, there's a Telegraph, there's a front page of Oba Overami, they called him.
Yeah.
His name is Ovorame, right?
Yeah.
And that was his proper name.
Wow.
Okay? And what actually, just a brief story, what actually happened was there's a festival that was going on in Benin, and it goes on today, every year, around about December. It still goes on today. And foreigners were not really allowed to come in at that time.
Okay. And
the British decided to still come in, and when they came in, some overzealous chiefs got involved and fisticuffs, and people, Captain Phillips died. And so round the corner in, I think, Cross River State and Ghana, which were already taken over by the British, they sent expeditionary force over, and they just ransacked the palace,
And sold the bronzes to pay for the expedition.
Absolutely. Landed in Liverpool, the ship landed, and they just started auctioning it at the docks at Liverpool.
Are you serious?
Absolutely.
Roll up.
The docks.
Buy a lovely bronze.
Yeah. Absolutely. And then the Ovorami was deported to another place called Calabar. I don't know if you heard of Calabar. He was sent there, and that's where he died, in exile. And later on, he's returned. And
his grandson, and now his great grandson, your first cousin, have preserved their title, and they're still the Oba.
Absolutely, it goes from first son. It goes from first son to 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 first son. So, if we trace our ancestry 900 years from son to son.
Well, I'll tell you what, I've taken some calls over the years, but I'd having a little conversation about the Benin bronzes and the great grandson of the chap who was king of Benin when the bronzes were stolen rings in. I'm going to give you I don't know if you're familiar. Go on.
I'll give you a hint. My son, who went to Downside, is now actually a professional rugby player for Bath. So check out the surname if you want to do some investigations there. And you find out.
I think you check out this surname, because this is the honour that I pay to people who are ridiculously well qualified to contribute to the conversation that we're having on the programme. I don't know whether it's going to mean anything to you, but trust me, it's a very, very high accolade.
I'm Ray Liotta, and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. If you build it, they will come.
I will remember that. No, thank you. Seriously, that was mad. Honored. That's so amazing. And there you go. I said I was going to change my mind. Send the bronzes back to Benin. Do it now. Seriously. Tomorrow's not soon enough. That's it from me for another day. We'll do it all again tomorrow morning from 10. The next voice you will hear on LBC belongs to Sheila Fogarty. 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 To Sheila Fogarty, 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 to Sheila Fogarty.